everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Cindy Lewis, and this is my presentation on the silent sheep, English as a second language. And this topic was actually really important to me because I work as a preschool teacher at a school in Fremont, California. And it's not technically an English immersion school, but most of the children that come into my classroom speak Mandarin as a first language. So a lot of them are English as a second language learners. So this has a special place in my heart. So I hope you enjoy and learn a little bit about some teaching strategies today. So of all the requests that Jesus has asked of his followers, one of the greatest has always been to provide for his sheep and to teach them. So this means that we as Christian educators have a duty to take care of every student in our classroom, regardless of their abilities, their ethnicity, their personal development, their challenges. We happen to live in an increasingly global economy, so a lot of teachers are often exposed to students from many diverse backgrounds. Specifically, students who are learning English as a second language in the mainstream classroom are at a high risk for being left behind. You can imagine they will struggle to keep up with the curriculum, they'll have a hard time creating relationships, making friends, feeling connected, communicating, asking for help, understanding instructions, and their families might have a hard time accessing resources. And unfortunately, teachers are also human, so we will struggle against our own biases or personal views regarding our English language learners. So it is the role of the Christian teacher to care for Jesus' flock, and there are some strategies that can be used to assist English language learners to improve their chances of succeeding in public school. So this was a question I asked myself when I was doing my research project, what the difference is between ESL, English as a second language, and ELL, English language learner. So an ESL student will be in a specialized course that teaches English as a second language, whereas an ELL student is going to be in the mainstream classroom and just not speaking English as their first language. English language learners will include any student who primarily speaks a foreign language. They're placed into a dominantly English-speaking environment, and this might mean they've recently come to a new country or to an international school. And keep in mind, they're also going to come from a wide range of educational experiences, socioeconomic, cultural, linguistic backgrounds. By 2014, there were over 4.5 million English language learners in mainstream public schools in the United States. And the reason I put a clip of the Western states is because these are the states with the highest increases in English language learners. And if you look in California, right on the coast, in between Oakland and San Jose, that's where I live, in Fremont. This presentation is called The Silent Sheep because these children will often go through a silent period that will last anywhere from a week up to a year. And that's a long time and a period of great stress. They will often go through this silent phase, and it's a time of discomfort for the student, the classmates, the teacher, and the whole community as they strive to create clear communication and elicit responses from the student. You can imagine this period of adjustment can develop varying levels of stress within the student, especially if their learning needs are not met. And it's really easy for ELL students to feel isolated and left out. There are 3 basic factors that will affect the language acquisition of an English language learner. These include the child's personal traits or characteristics, any prior language exposure or development, and whatever situational or environmental factors are occurring at that moment. And as teachers in the classroom setting, we really only have control of this last category. So it's really important that we set up the class environment to reach each student's learning style. Educators in all age groups are naturally going to bring their own views into the classroom and their own bias. And because of this, it's so important that teachers address any negative stereotypes or personal perceptions they might hold regarding their English language learners' abilities, ethnicities, or cultures. This does require a high level of self-reflection and a willingness to learn each new student's needs and abilities without the added weight of previous prejudice. So as much as possible, create relationships of mutual respect and cooperation with the parents or the caregivers of the student. And something that I've learned, that creating partnership between the adults in a child's life creates a support network for the student. And as I mentioned, feelings of isolation are very common for ELL students. So the more that you as a teacher pursues an understanding of the student's home culture and their social cues, the better equipped you're going to be to help the student feel more comfortable in their new environment. So this page is talking about the two strikes that are against students that are English language learners. You can imagine that because of their disadvantage regarding not only cultural understanding, but their ability to communicate, minority children, whatever their first language, will often enter school with two strikes against them. Unlike the majority culture children, they must learn not only academic content, but a new set of communicative conventions at the same time. And that quote was taken from a book called Language Minority Students in the Mainstream Classroom. So they're already coming into your classroom with a huge disadvantage against them. And due largely to these combined difficulties, ELL students have lagged behind their English speaking counterparts on most traditional assessments throughout the history of our standardized testing in this country. So let's think of some strategies we can use. In order to integrate all your learners, of course, you're going to have to start modifying the way that you present your curriculum. This is going to require careful planning that will take place to ensure that language functions are not only integrated but understood before being used. It also requires explanations of new vocabulary and technical terms that they will need for an assignment or a unit. Those should be consciously addressed with the class beforehand. We've learned a little bit about differentiating lesson plans the last few weeks, so we know that lesson plans need to be designed with all students in mind, and that we can put students in different groups for learning styles or abilities or interests. And your objectives on your lesson plans should be primarily targeted for comprehension so that you can make sure that the students are understanding the information. There are some comprehension skills that can be applied to all academic situations. These include summarizing, using compare and contrast to present new information, using sequencing and ordering, so kind of fill in the blank of the next, or you can relate a child's background knowledge to the new classroom information. Some things that I use in my classroom are role play or dramatic play that get the students engaged both with each other and with objects in the classroom. And there are also multiple websites and resources for teachers concerning reading and writing strategies that you can implement in your curriculum. And there's also a lot of aids that can be utilized, like posters, music, videos, visual tools. I really like to use physical items when learning new vocabulary. It helps the student have that visual tool. And these aids are also helping teach to all the students' various intelligences as we've been learning. You can also switch out these items in the classroom to be adjusted as the students grow, as they become more confident in the classroom, or throughout the school year for the entire class. Now, I know that most educators are not going to be formally trained in teaching English as a foreign language. I happen to have my TEFL certification, and I think it was really useful, especially where I am as a teacher with children that are learning English as a second language. It's been really useful in my normal curriculum. And these training courses are also considered extended education courses. So you can ask your school if they can be used for recertification or for professional development credits. And beyond TEFL, there are also teaching organizations that will offer support for educators across the world. One of my favorites is the International Association for Language and Intercultural Communication. So it's a website with a lot of different tools on it. There's also ones that are nationwide in our country, like the National Clearinghouse for English Language Acquisition. So both of these sites are going to provide resources targeted to create an inclusive approach to integrate your English learning students into the mainstream classroom. So that's what these are designed to reach. Even if a teacher has a multi-subject credential, or you don't actually specialize in English, writing, or language in general, you can still use any of these strategies to improve your ability to raise your students' general understanding and retention. And let's face it, if a traditional means of teaching cannot be used, then neither can a traditional means of assessment. In English language learning, students might be seen as having a learning delay. And as I mentioned before, they historically fall below average on standardized testing. So obviously we can't use typical testing on atypical students. And as seen throughout our study of multiple intelligences and learning styles, it's really important to know a student's strengths and interests in order to thoroughly engage them. And once you get them engaged, you can accurately assess their abilities. And something that I've always lived by as a teacher is focusing on what the children can do instead of what they can't, because this tends to boost their self-esteem and make them feel capable and able. We've also learned a little bit about differentiated assessment tools. the last week or so. For example, you might modify a test for an English language student. You can also use different kinds of documentation, such as portfolios, physical examples of their work, recordings of the student in the classroom. And these are going to give you a more accurate idea of the student's skills than a typical multiple choice test would. I imagine a lot of you have seen this quote before, but it's one of my absolute favorite quotes regarding education. And it's, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it is stupid. And that is so important to realize as teachers, that we can make or break our students. So if we build them up in their interests and the things that they're really good at, they're going to go through life with this belief that they are capable and able to handle the obstacles that they're going to face. It's very possible that your English language learner student is only being exposed to English at school, especially if the family primarily speaks a native language at home. And this has happened to me and my co-teacher, Rose Henderson, who's in this class. Some of the parents put pressure on us as teachers to be the only ones teaching their children English, even though it's not technically an English as a second language school. So our curriculum it needs to be modified to help these new students that come into our classroom that do not speak any English. So keep in mind that in some cases, you as a teacher might be the only adult advocating for the student's English acquisition. So it's really important to establish supportive partnerships and relationships with the family, because once you do that, you have a better foundation where you might be able to guide the family to resources in their community that they can actually use as well. If the family is open to the idea, you can provide organizations like the Center for Parent Information and Resources. And this gives them access to toolkits for parents, local learning centers, public policies. It also can provide them information on their students' educational rights in the school district. And I feel like that's really crucial for a family coming to a new country. They should definitely know what rights their child does have. There's also really useful websites such as Teachers First, which doesn't need to only be used by teachers. Families can use it too. And it has lists and lists of writing and reading games. And this will not only increase the child's confidence, but also increases the family's engagement in their child's learning as well and gets them involved hands-on. There's also sites that I like Reading Rockets. This site has videos on interactive reading ideas, and it also has parent tip sheets in multiple languages, so the family isn't left out if they don't speak English at all. So beyond teaching strategies and academic tools come the most important gifts that I believe a teacher can use. And these are faith in the child and loving support through their journey. With these two things, I think that anything can be overcome. Because if you look throughout Scripture, believers are instructed to provide for the lost, right? And to lead God's people to Him. And thankfully, teachers are placed in this important role of guiding and coaching and loving each of these struggling students that comes into their care. If you read in Acts, we're implored to keep watch over ourselves and the entire flock of which the Holy Spirit has made us overseers. And Jesus also says a couple times that if a follower loves Him, he will shepherd the Lord's sheep. So teaching, especially spreading the love of Jesus Christ to people of other nations, is a sacred duty to which Christians are called. So let's look. In the first couple weeks, we examined how Jesus taught. And if you think about it, the lessons He shared were often like a foreign language to the people that He met. But He didn't become frustrated very easily. No, instead He adjusted His messages to their level of understanding. And Jesus had a beautiful gift to connect with people in a way that each could understand. Paul also talks to us and instructs believers to meet the lost on their level in order to form a foundation from which to teach and share God's love. And I know that it's really difficult to love those whom we do not understand, and still we're commanded to love our neighbors as ourselves. So what better way to model this than in the classroom community, right? We are role models for these students, and if we show Jesus' love to them, we are also teaching the other children in our classroom as well. And I love this quote in Matthew 18:5, where Jesus says, "Anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf is welcoming me." So we are bringing Jesus into the classroom, and I think that that is a beautiful thing. So let's see. If a teacher can't understand his or her student due to language barriers, then it is their job to adjust so that the student feels welcomed and acknowledged. So what we can do is we can help the student navigate their new setting by putting up signs or labels in their native language around the classroom. The teachers and the classmates can also learn some simple instructional phrases that might help for daily routines or explaining classroom rules. The teacher can also learn useful questions and responses, and that's really helpful, especially during that silent period when the child is usually frozen and unable to initiate communication. I think it's very important too to be culturally humble and sensitive. And as we read in Ephesians 4:2, we should act with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. So I think it's important to encourage the other students to be welcoming and inclusive to the new child as well. And that might help them form friendships and to feel welcomed. If there is prior knowledge of the student's arrival, the teacher can prepare the class on the ELL child's home culture. So at all times, strive to create common ground in the classroom and find ways to connect the learning with all the students' backgrounds or previous experiences. I think that finding inclusion in the classroom is one of the best ways to create a trusting, loving relationship between not only the teachers and the students, but between the classmates as well. So if a child feels wanted, research shows that their level of engagement in their learning environment dramatically increases, along with their self-confidence and also along with their overall performance in school. So I think it's really important to remember what Jesus asked of Simon. So Jesus asked a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Simon answered, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." So what did Jesus tell him? He told him to shepherd my sheep. So if Christian educators are to fully encompass Jesus' love, we need to start by making changes in our own environments. So before you even engage with an English language learning student, make sure to check your own attitude and to maintain a habit of self-reflection at all times. Because like I said, teachers are the role models for the future, and our other students are going to pick up on our feelings, our judgments, our biases. They're going to pick up on how we interact with a new student. So we need to abandon our preconceptions outside the classroom because, let's face it, these really have no place in academics, and they're only going to set up your students to fail. So instead of that, I think it's important to set a foundation of inclusion and a framework that takes into account all students' abilities, development, and learning styles. We don't want to single out one student because of a particular challenge. So adjust your teaching patterns to include comprehension strategies. Always assess for understanding. Make sure your students are on board with new information. Create relationships inside and outside of the classroom. And remember that a teacher is often a student's greatest advocate, and we're therefore charged to take care of this flock that's placed under our care. And breaking down barriers is one of the most powerful and rewarding responsibilities given to a Christian teacher, and I think that's truly a gift from the Lord. Well, that concludes my presentation. If you have any questions about teaching strategies for English language learners, feel free to send me an email. It's cl033@gmail.cairn.edu. I would be happy to try to plan some things with you. If you have any extra questions, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you learned something today.